Hi everyone, welcome back to Dish and Tea with Dee. Welcome. So today are actually this video we're actually going to be talking about the bird flu that has come up there. I think it's in Michigan. Um, Let me just double check. Yes, Michigan. So it's about dairy farms. Cattle have been infected with this bird flu that they never thought cows were ever going to get this kind of virus. So I'm going to play my intro. You like and subscribe to the video, and then we'll get right into it. All right. Nah, bro, I'm back on animal control. Nah, that shit ain't right. He's violating over Bluetooth.
Meat from a dairy cow that was culled from its herd and sent to slaughter has tested positive for traces of the H5N1 bird flu virus, the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced Friday, but no meat from the cow entered the food supply. The USDA said viral particles of H5N1 were detected during testing of various tissues, including samples from the diaphragm muscle, which sits below the lungs. The testing was done as a standard part of the food inspection process, the USDA said. Infectious disease experts around the world have been on alert since the USDA announced March 25 that a dairy cow tested positive for H5N1 influenza. H5N1 is a highly pathogenic form of bird flu that scientists have watched closely since it was detected in 1996. It has decimated wild bird populations and poultry flocks, but only sporadically infects humans. When it does, it can be fatal. About half of the roughly 900 people known to be infected around the world over the past 2 decades have died. In the past 2 years, the virus has changed and begun to infect a growing assortment of mammals. Experts never expected the virus to show up in cows, as it was thought that they didn't have the right receptors on their cells to catch A-strain flu viruses, but it turns out they do. In this outbreak, the virus has mostly been showing up in the milk of dairy cows and causing mastitis, or an infection of the mammary gland. Cows stop producing as much milk, but they generally recover after a few weeks. 2 U.S. farm workers are known to have tested positive in conjunction with the ongoing dairy cow outbreak. In both cases, the virus infected their eyes, causing redness and swelling, but they recovered. Finding a cow that tested positive for H5N1 postmortem after systemic disease suggests that some sick animals are going undetected. It also suggests that the owners may not have tested the animal before its slaughter and that other cows in the herd may be infected. The USDA said the dead cow tested positive for H5N1 on May 22. It has notified the owners and is tracing the animal to the herd it came from to get more information, the agency said. The USDA says samples taken from 95 other cows that were culled and condemned for illness tested negative for the virus as of May 22, and testing is underway on about a dozen more samples. The test the USDA used, which is called polymerase chain reaction testing or PCR, identified genetic material from H5N1 virus, but it could not determine whether that material was infectious and could have made someone sick. Earlier tests on samples of ground beef using a different virus as a stand-in for H5N1 found that the virus was killed when the burgers were cooked to at least 145 degrees Fahrenheit or medium. Cooking burgers to rare, a temperature of 120 degrees, substantially reduced levels of active virus, but did not kill it all. The USDA already recommends that burgers be cooked to an internal temperature of 160 degrees to kill dangerous pathogens such as Salmonella and E. coli. A third person in the U.S. has tested positive for H5 bird flu in connection to an ongoing outbreak in dairy cattle, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services said Thursday. This is the second human case reported in the state and the fourth ever in the U.S. This time, in addition to some of the eye symptoms seen with previous H5N1 cases, the farmworker reported a cough and other respiratory symptoms that are more typical of human influenza infections, the health department said. This individual had respiratory symptoms, including a cough, congestion, sore throat, and watery eyes, Dr. Nirav Shah, the principal deputy director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, said at a briefing Thursday. What the respiratory symptoms tell us more than anything is that this virus, like many viruses, can present in more than one way, and for that reason, we should remain alert, not be alarmed, he added. Experts said that the addition of respiratory symptoms doesn't necessarily indicate that the virus has become more dangerous or that it may transmit more easily from person to person. Instead, they say, the person probably developed lung symptoms because of the route of infection, perhaps by breathing in infectious aerosols in the milking parlor instead of rubbing their eyes with contaminated hands. With the first case in Michigan, eye symptoms occurred after a direct splash of infected milk to the eye. With this case, respiratory symptoms occurred after direct exposure to an infected cow, Dr. Natasha Bagdasarian, chief medical executive for Michigan, said in a news release. Neither individual was wearing full personal protective equipment, PPE. This tells us that direct exposure to infected livestock poses a risk to humans, and that PPE is an important tool in preventing spread among individuals who work on dairy and poultry farms. We have not seen signs of sustained human-to-human transmission, and the current health risk to the general public remains low. About 220 people are being monitored in Michigan because of potential exposure to the virus, Shah said. Michigan, the state with the highest number of dairy herds reported to be infected, is also beginning to conduct blood testing to see how many workers may have antibodies to the H5N1 virus, which would reflect past infections or exposures. The CDC agreed that the risk to the general public remains low. But this case highlights the elevated risk to those who work with infected animals. The CDC has recommended that dairy workers wear personal protective equipment to reduce their risk. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has offered financial support to farms with infected animals to provide workers with protection. Previously, we focused on the importance of eye protection, given the conjunctivitis in the first two cases, but this case also underscores the importance of barrier protection, things like masks and other forms of protection for dairy workers, particularly those who are working with affected cows, Shah said. Research is ongoing into how infections are transmitting between cows and from cows to people who work with them. This is the third human infection known to be caused by this highly pathogenic form of avian influenza that's currently infecting dairy cattle in the U.S. None of the three people had contact with each other, but all worked with cattle, suggesting that they are instances of cow-to-human transmission. The other two cases involved eye infections or conjunctivitis. The most recent worker had some mild eye symptoms but was not diagnosed with conjunctivitis. The person had direct contact with infected cattle and notified local health officials that they were feeling sick. Their symptoms are described as mild. The patient has been given the antiviral medication oseltamivir, the same active ingredient as Tamiflu, and they are isolating at home. Their family members have not developed symptoms, but they have also been offered antiviral medication as a precaution. None of the other workers at the dairy farm has gotten sick, and they are being monitored, the CDC said. Given the high magnitude of interactions between people and dairy cows as well as with contaminated milking equipment, it is unsurprising that there are more human infections, said Dr. Seema Lakdawala, an infectious disease specialist at Emory University who is studying how the virus is transmitting in dairy barns. Every time the virus is able to replicate in a person, there is the potential for the virus to adapt to humans and gain molecular features for replication in the respiratory tract and to spread person to person, Lakdawala said. Flu viruses are classified by two of the proteins that sit on their outer envelopes, H or hemagglutinin proteins and N, neuraminidase proteins. CDC testing has confirmed that this third person carries a flu virus with an H5 protein, and the agency will do further sequencing to determine whether the N portion of the virus is N1, as is suspected. It expects to have those results in the next few days. The CDC confirmed Wednesday night that the person had an H5 influenza infection and forwarded the results to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services announced last week that it was moving forward with a plan to repackage 4.8 million doses of a vaccine against H5N1 that is stored in bulk form in the Strategic National Stockpile. The bulk supplies would be put into multi-dose vials so they could be distributed and administered more easily. Officials said Thursday that before the vaccine would be given, it would need to go through certain regulatory steps. They also said there's not currently a plan to offer or recommend the doses to any specific group of people. The fill and finish process to repackage the vaccines will take at least a couple of months, officials said in the news briefing. In the meantime, Michigan's health department is advising people working on poultry or dairy farms to get a seasonal flu vaccine. It will not prevent infection with avian influenza viruses, but it can reduce the risk of co-infection with avian and flu viruses, the department said.
All right, guys, tell me what you think. Write in the comments, write whatever. Let me know if you think this is going to be a big old outbreak or if they're going to be able to control it. I don't think that they're going to be able to control it. They already thought that it couldn't go from birds to cows or from one animal to another animal. Now they are saying now it can't be go from human to human unless they start mutating and all this other stuff, whatever. So just keep your ears open and just watch what you eat. All right. Well, like and subscribe this to this video and tell me what you think again down below. And have a good one. Y'all stay safe.